We're going in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what up everyone, Tay here, and a lot to talk about today in a somewhat shorter video regarding a bunch of new details that have come out recently regarding Avengers Doomsday. So we're going to be talking about some X-Men and Captain Marvel stuff. We're also going to be going through some of the new reports that dropped recently about surprise new characters and villains that we will see in Avengers Doomsday. And then later on in the video, I'm also going to talk about some new Fantastic Four first step theories that could also tie into the plot of Avengers Doomsday as well. And as you may have noticed, I am trying to keep these videos a bit on the shorter side lately, around like 30, 35 minutes at the longest instead of those crazy hour-long videos, because those hour-long ones really do burn me out afterwards because they just take so long to edit. So in today's video, we're going to be talking more about stuff that we could see happen primarily in like the first half of Avengers Doomsday. And then I have another video that is already almost finished that I will be posting tomorrow, where I'm going to delve into the full Avengers Doomsday plot leaks that dropped recently and go through all the crazy details involved in that. So yeah, if you are subscribed to the channel, make sure you have your notifications turned on so you are notified when that video drops tomorrow. And in today's video, we do have some super thanks to get to towards the end of the video, so watch until the end for those. But anyways, I will stop rambling and let's get into it.
Morning, Logan.
Storm. It's good to see you, Charles. It's good to see everyone.
What's the last thing you remember?
Alright, so before we get into the full Doomsday plot leak, first I want to talk about some of the smaller scoops and reports that have dropped recently, and how they give us an overall idea of what could happen early on in Avengers Doomsday. Now, there have been multiple leaked set photos that could end up being fake, but the only confirmed set photos that we've seen have been these ones that appears to be some kind of courtyard where we see various different statues, and there are these large impact craters littered throughout it. And the main theory going around online is that this is the set for the X-Mansion, or the outdoor set for the X-Mansion. And according to some news scoops from Daniel Richman, that this is the outdoor set for the X-Mansion of another universe, and that it will likely be the same universe that we saw Monica Rambeau visit at the end of the Marvels. And another little scoop that Daniel Richman dropped is that the X-Men of this universe will also be getting their comic-accurate suits, just like Logan did in Deadpool and Wolverine. Which I don't think is a big shock, I think we all expected that, but it's worth mentioning. And apparently, this new X-Men universe is going to be a timeline that will be very similar to the Fox X-Men universe, specifically the Fox X-Men universe as it was left off at the end of Days of Future Past, but that it won't be exactly the same, which again isn't surprising based on what we saw in Deadpool and Wolverine, because this will allow Marvel Studios to use many of the same actors from the original Fox X-Men films, but still give them the freedom to add new characters to that mix, like Lashana Lynch as Binary and Channing Tatum as Gambit, as well as possibly other characters that we haven't heard about yet. And something that I've talked about in past videos is how when we see the incursions and the multiversal war in Avengers Doomsday, that we could end up seeing characters from multiple different realities that all kind of end up getting caught up in this multiversal war because of the incursions. And while I do still think that that could technically be the case, according to other reports that have come out recently, they are saying that the main plotline when it comes to the multiversal war in Avengers Doomsday will revolve around the MCU 616 universe and the Divergent X-Men universe from the end of the Marvels. And that with Monica Rambeau being stuck in that universe, that this will cause the two universes to pull together, and that this will be what ultimately causes an incursion to occur between these two realities that will lead to a war between the heroes of the 616 universe and the X-Men of the other universe. And while that definitely lines up, I should note that this also seems to go against some of the past leaks that we've heard saying that the incursions in Avengers Doomsday would be an after effect of the near incursion events at the end of No Way Home. However, it might not completely contradict that, because these new leaks also say that Doctor Strange will still somehow be involved with the incursions, but that it will just be in some kind of broader sense, because the main cause will be linked to both Monica Rambeau and Carol Danvers, which I will come back to in a second. But like I said, this plotline doesn't mean that we won't also see characters from other universes in Avengers Doomsday, because I think that we definitely will, only that when it comes to the incursions, that the story will most likely focus more on the Avengers versus X-Men plot, as to avoid it potentially becoming convoluted. Which, when you think about it, does make sense, because there's already going to be so many different characters in this movie that I'm sure that Marvel Studios and the Russo brothers are very aware of the possibility of making the story overly complicated, and that they will be trying to simplify certain aspects in order to make sure that doesn't happen. And we know that when it comes to the plot of both Doomsday and Secret Wars, that the Russo brothers have said that they will be adapting bits and pieces from various different Marvel comics, but that they will ultimately be fitting those pieces together to create their own unique story that links up with where everything is currently at in the MCU. And the primary comics that I've theorized will have a significant influence on the plot of Avengers Doomsday based on the different reports we've heard are Time Runs Out, Avengers Forever, The Children's Crusade, and John Byrne's Darker Than Scarlet. And of course, the original 1984 Secret Wars. However, the story that I've always said that I thought would perhaps have the largest influence on Avengers Doomsday is the first issue of Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars comic from 2015. Because while the rest of Hickman's Secret Wars story occurs within Battleworld, issue number 1 is more of a prelude to Battleworld that ends with the destruction of the multiverse. Because Secret Wars number 1 is all about this big multiversal war that happens between the 616 universe and the Ultimate Universe, Universe 1610, as heroes from both of these worlds all clash in this gigantic battle, with both sides trying to save their home world from the final incursion. And by the sounds of it, it looks like that will be very similar to what's going to happen in Avengers Doomsday, with the Divergent X-Men universe from the Marvels taking on a similar role to that of the Ultimate Universe in the comics. And ever since Marvel Studios officially announced their plans for Avengers Secret Wars, something I've wondered about is if Marvel Studios will introduce a version of the Ultimate Universe for the MCU, or at the very least include a universe that will basically act as a stand-in for the Ultimate Universe. Because over the past 25 years since it was introduced, besides the 616 timeline, the Ultimate Universe has consistently been the other most prominent and important universe in the Marvel Comics multiverse. Now, at this time, we don't yet know what the official title or designation number will be for this Divergent X-Men universe. So for all we know, maybe it will actually be revealed as Timeline 1610 and truly will be the Ultimate Universe of the MCU. But whether or not it's actually the Ultimate Universe or will just take on a similar role to the Ultimate Universe, either way, this could have some pretty big implications for the plot of Doomsday and Secret Wars, because this could open the door for other big variants and villains to also come from this reality besides just the X-Men, like perhaps other Avengers variants, Nicolas Cage's Ghost Rider, or maybe even the evil variant of Reed Richards, the Maker. However, since we are on this topic, I should note that according to recent reports, besides the X-Men, one of the other teams that we will reportedly see from this universe is going to be Magneto and the Brotherhood of Mutants. Now, we don't yet have any details on what role they will play in the movie and if they will be fighting alongside the X-Men or may have some kind of other subplot. But when I first heard this news, something that it made me think of is if Magneto and the Brotherhood might have a similar role to the one that the Cabal had in the comics. Because in Hickman's Incursion saga, the Cabal were a team of villains that were trying to stop the incursions by ruthlessly destroying the Earths of other universes. And this team included Namor and Thanos' Black Order, along with the Maker of the Ultimate Universe. And, the Cabal were actually a pretty important group in the Secret Wars story. Because while they were technically villains, they also ended up eventually working with some of the Avengers on Battleworld to help defeat Doctor Doom. And that is something we've heard different reports about, that in Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, we will see heroes working alongside villains in order to defeat Doctor Doom. So yeah, with this news of the Brotherhood also appearing in Avengers Doomsday, I can't help but wonder if they might take on a similar role to the Cabal in the comics, and that maybe Magneto could even take on a similar role to the one that the Maker had, to where the Brotherhood are trying to save their reality, but that they are much more ruthless about it than the X-Men are willing to be. And if something like this happens, then it's possible that we could even see other characters working with the Brotherhood, like maybe Namor, considering that he worked with the Cabal in the comics and would likely be accepted by the group as he is also technically a mutant. Plus, I mean, another thing worth mentioning is that one of the new scoops that just dropped from Cryptic HD is that the Russo brothers are also planning on including several other one-and-done villains to appear in Doomsday and Secret Wars, sort of similar to how we saw the Black Order in Infinity War and Endgame. So, who knows? Maybe the Maker could actually show up as one of those one-and-done villains, because again, the Maker was a very important character in Hickman's whole Secret Wars comic, and there have also been rumors that we could see the Council of Reeds in either the Fantastic Four First Steps or Avengers Doomsday. Now, if we do see the Maker introduced in a villain role for the upcoming Avengers movies, my personal preference would be that the Russo brothers would get John Krasinski to return to play that role. Or, of course, another option would be Johan Griffith from the older Fox Fantastic Four movies. And I know some people might be saying, well, wait, what about Miles Teller? I mean, of course, that is another possibility as well, but based on some of his recent interviews where he's been asked about the new Fantastic Four movie, I kind of get the sense that he's not really that interested in returning to that character. So I would say that he is less likely, but like I said, my hope would be that they would get John Krasinski to return, because I think he would be really good in that role. Plus, we also know that he was pretty disappointed that he only got to play Reed Richards for one very short cameo in Multiverse of Madness. So I think he would actually be really into returning to play the Maker if given the opportunity. But anyways, before we move on, let's jump back real quick to something I touched on a little bit earlier, and that is how both Monica Rambeau and Carol Danvers could be the ones who will be responsible for directly causing the incursion in Avengers Doomsday. Because something that came up in some of these new plot leaks for Avengers Doomsday that I will be talking about in more detail in the next video is how Monica Rambeau will apparently be the character that's pulling the 616 universe and this X-Men universe together, that Carol Danvers could technically be the one who triggers this incursion, because apparently ever since the events of the Marvels, Carol has been busy with both Wong and Bruce Banner researching and doing experiments on the quantum band that she got from Dar-Ben, trying to figure out a way to open a portal back to that universe so she can bring Monica home. And this definitely makes sense, because at the end of the Marvels, remember, we saw Dar-Ben accidentally cause an incursion to occur, but luckily Monica Rambeau was able to close this incursion before it caused a collision between those two universes, and this is how she ended up getting stuck in that other X-Men universe in the first place. So if Carol, Bruce, and Wong are doing experiments on the quantum bands trying to figure out how to open that doorway once again, it's pretty easy to see how that could end up being a mistake and could have a disastrous outcome. So yeah, all of this that we're talking about could have some huge implications. Because in the end, I'm assuming that it will technically be Doctor Doom who will be the one to destroy the multiverse, but that this incursion will likely be what leads to that being a possibility. Because with so many of Earth's heroes being too busy dealing with the multiversal war with the X-Men, this will likely make them unable to deal with the true threat in Doctor Doom. And then once they do learn about Doom, or at the very least, learn about Doom's true motives, they will likely be too late to stop it. So yeah, if these new scoops about Captain Marvel, Hulk, and Wong are true, then they will likely have a lot of redeeming to do, because their actions could ultimately have a domino effect that will lead to the war with the X-Men and eventually to Doctor Doom becoming victorious and destroying the multiverse. However, something that we can talk about in the future is if Carol Danvers and Kamala Khan still have their quantum bands in Avengers Secret Wars, then I could see that being a central link in the plot of that movie that could somehow tie into how Doctor Doom will be defeated or something along those lines. And one of the aspects that was cool about the 2015 Secret Wars comic, there were different powerful relics from the Marvel Universe that existed and were spread across Battleworld. So maybe we could see something similar to that in Battleworld in Avengers Secret Wars. You know, maybe at the beginning of the Secret Wars movie, Captain Marvel and Miss Marvel won't have the quantum bands anymore, and maybe Shang-Chi also won't have the 10 rings. And maybe that could be one of the key subplots in the movie, to where those characters have to go on a quest to find where those MacGuffins are so that they can use them in their plan to defeat Doom or reset the multiverse or whatever. Now again, that's a theory for a future video, but it is something to think about. But anyways, now that I've covered that, let's move on to the last section of the video, because there is still some very important stuff I want to talk about regarding the Fantastic Four, and how what happens with Reed Richards in the Fantastic Four movie could be what reveals several other universes that exist out in the MCU multiverse that we haven't yet seen.
Are you the protectors of this world?
Yes, we are.
Your planet is now marked for death.
It's my fault. I stretched the bounds of space. And they hurt.
Alright, so since we've been talking about the X-Men universe a lot in this video, and this whole idea of, potentially it being the ultimate universe or kind of taking on that role, one of the other things I wanted to touch on is what other universes we might see in Avengers Doomsday. Because obviously there are several other major timelines that have popped up so far throughout the multiverse saga, like the 838 universe in Doctor Strange 2, and Timeline 10,005, the Fox universe in Deadpool and Wolverine, on top of any of the other universes that we could possibly see from past Marvel Legacy films, like the Raimi-verse or the Fox Fantastic Four universe. However, like I mentioned earlier, because there is already so much that needs to happen in the short span of a 2.5 or 3 hour movie, I think that a lot of fans might want to temper their expectations a little bit on just how crazy and multiversal Avengers Doomsday is going to get. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the movie is still going to be very crazy and over the top with a lot of huge elements to it. It's going to be one of the biggest event films Marvel Studios has ever put out. And I do think that we are going to see a lot of multiversal characters that are from those universes, especially once we get to Avengers Secret Wars. Because once we get to Battleworld in Secret Wars, Marvel Studios can pretty much use that concept to bring in any multiversal characters that they want based on which actors are available. However, when it comes to this idea of revisiting all of these past universes in Avengers Doomsday, I just don't know if there's going to be time for all of that. However, there is one way, actually, where we could see at least a brief cameo appearance of a lot of those universes that ties back to Reed Richards and the Fantastic Four First Steps. Because when the first trailer for Fantastic Four dropped, we saw how a big plot point in that movie is going to revolve around Reed Richards researching multiversal travel. And after that trailer dropped a few months ago, myself and many other people theorized that we could potentially see the bridge introduced in the Fantastic Four movie, and that this could reveal how the Fantastic Four will ultimately make their way to the MCU 616 universe for Avengers Doomsday. Because in the comics, the bridge was a device that Reed Richards built that could open doorways to different universes, and ultimately ended up being a very important plot device during the Incursion saga. Because not only did the bridge allow Reed to travel to different universes, but it also allowed him to view other universes in the multiverse on a monitor as if he was watching, multiversal reality television. And what happened was once the incursions started to slowly wipe out the multiverse, Reed used the bridge to view and watch how the Avengers and heroes in other universes were dealing with the incursions in the hopes that he could use it to find a solution on how to stop the incursions once one came for the 616 universe. And I bring this up because I think it's possible that Marvel Studios could kind of take a similar route, and that they could potentially use the bridge in a similar way in both the Fantastic Four and Avengers Doomsday. You know, that once Reed and the Avengers know about Doctor Doom and the incursions, that they could basically use the bridge to watch what is happening in other universes throughout the multiverse in hopes of finding an answer on how to deal with all of this for themselves. And I think that would actually be really smart on Marvel Studios' part, because it would provide them with a tool to where they can show what some of the other crazy universes throughout the multiverse look like without eating up a lot of screen time or taking away from the bigger plot of the movie. And I'll actually give you an example of how we might have already seen the bridge in effect in the new Fantastic Four trailer. Because in that second trailer, there's one moment that everyone's been talking about where we see the Fantastic Four ship in space looking down on Earth as it is destroyed. And this left a lot of people wondering if Marvel Studios just gave away the ending of the Fantastic Four movie and just showed us Galactus basically destroying their world. And as cool as I think that would actually be, I'm not so sure if that's actually what we're seeing here. And I think what actually could be happening is that this could be footage from the bridge. That, you know, maybe what happens in the Fantastic Four movie is once Galactus invades the Earth of their universe, that Reed Richards could use the bridge to view divergent realities that are very similar to their universe but not exactly the same, so that Reed can view how the Fantastic Four teams of those other universes dealt with Galactus, and that what we are seeing in the trailer could be the moment when Galactus consumes the Earth of one of these divergent universes, basically just like what Reed did with the incursions in the comics. And to be honest, I actually hope that I'm actually wrong about this, and that the Fantastic Four movie does end with the destruction of their world, because for one, I like dark endings like that, and I think it would be a bold choice on Marvel Studios' part to technically have the Fantastic Four fail at saving their world, because it would then set them up for a big redemption arc to help save the multiverse in Avengers Secret Wars. But, you know, the more I think about it, I'm just not so sure if Marvel Studios will be that bold to let their first Fantastic Four movie end with the team failing to save their world and having that whole population presumably die. Now, I should note that there are other possibilities for what we could be seeing here as well. Like, for example, maybe what happens is that in the movie, the Fantastic Four do save their world from Galactus, but then in the post-credit scene, an incursion happens that ultimately destroys their world, and it's outside of their control, and that is when we see them use the bridge to leave and end up in the MCU 616 universe for Avengers Doomsday. Or, you know, something along those lines. But either way, regardless of what specifically is happening in this scene here, the bigger point I'm getting at is that I think the bridge will probably end up being introduced in the Fantastic Four First Steps, and that it will probably play a significant role in that movie, but I think that it could go on to play an even bigger role in Avengers Doomsday and could be a central link that ties together certain different aspects of that movie, and that, like I said, could be how Marvel Studios will show us glimpses of other universes, just like we saw in the comics. Because at some point in Avengers Doomsday, I do think it's important for the audience to see exactly what happens to a universe and to an Earth when an incursion occurs and destroys that timeline. So yeah, you guys let me know what you think about all this and leave your own crazy theories in the comments down below. And I think we can wrap this thing up. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like or share the video. That really helps out the channel a lot. And we do have just 3 super thanks questions from the last video to get to, so I think we can just jump into those right now. And the first one we have is $5 from Henry Lopez, and then we also have $5 from my guy Gator Chris. Thank you very much, Henry and Chris. Really appreciate it. And then we also have $5 from Philip North 4539. And this one says, "Hey, cool video. First super thanks ever. I'm a big UFO guy. I've seen every episode of The X-Files and all the movies. I listened to the Art Bell Show in the 90s. Bring it on. We are not alone. I mentioned that you should look into Timothy Alberino, Birthright. Today, I'm starting to dig into Sitchin. On the Sentry, is it possible that there's a connection between the Void from Loki and Deadpool and Wolverine and the Void inside the Sentry? Seems like a huge coincidence in the MCU that's not really that large comparatively to the comics. When I see him turn people to shadows and they disappear, I wonder where they're going. Could they be going to the Void? It's almost like they're being pruned. Cosmic Wonder thinks that Battleworld will be substituted by the Void. Maybe that's why Doom could have him captive. Maybe he's the key to that realm. I listen to Cosmic Wonder, Everything Always, and you for all my MCU news. Keep it up. P.S. I've been covering Todd McFarlane's current comic run on my channel, so you should come check it out. All right, will do, man. Thank you very much for that. And everyone go check out Philip's channel and give it some love. And as far as what you said about Cosmic Wonder thinking that Battleworld will be substituted by the Void, that's actually something I've talked about numerous times on the channel, and I first brought it up way back when Loki Season 1 dropped in 2021, which was even before Avengers Secret Wars was officially announced. Now, obviously, I know other people have that same theory as well, because it's not hard to put that together because the concept of the Void is so similar to the concept of Battleworld in the comics. But yeah, that's something I've talked about quite a bit on this channel in the past, and I actually haven't brought it up for a while because I didn't want to keep harping on about it. But yeah, I could see the Sentry potentially being connected to the Void at the end of time, but I think it'll all depend on exactly how his powers work and what we see in the Thunderbolts movie. So that's something I'll have to come back to on that to really form an opinion, because with the Sentry's alter ego in the comics always being called the Void, it could just be a coincidence. But once we get to Avengers Secret Wars, I do think that there is potentially something to the idea that Doctor Doom could be siphoning away powers from the Sentry or powers from the Void, kind of similar to what he did with Molecule Man in the comics. And that is something I actually wanted to touch on in the last video when we were talking about the Sentry, but because the whole Molecule Man angle and who could take on the role of Molecule Man is something I've talked about numerous times as well, I kind of avoided it because at this point I just didn't want to go too deep on that topic once again. And in truth, like I've said before, in Avengers Secret Wars, I think the whole role that Molecule Man had in the comics could kind of end up being divided between multiple characters, with the most likely candidates being Wanda Maximoff, Franklin Richards, and potentially also the Sentry. And then just lastly, real quick, I love listening to the old school Art Bell era of Coast to Coast. I remember when I was a kid in elementary school back in like the late 90s, listening to Coast when I would go to sleep at night, and it would totally freak me out, but I would still listen to it anyway. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Philip. Everyone go check out Philip's channel. And again, thank you to Henry and Chris for the super thanks. And all of you watching, remember that if you would like to leave a super thanks with a question or a comment on this video, that those are greatly appreciated. They really are, and that I will read and respond to those in the next video. And yeah, let's wrap this thing up. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. And just a quick reminder, I have another Avengers video I am working on right now that will be out very soon, hopefully tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. Make sure you have notifications turned on and subscribe to the channel if you are not currently subscribed and a fan of Marvel and the MCU, because that is the nerdy stuff we talk about here. And I will be back soon with the next one.